A white Englishman entered the restaurant just as the evening. Lights were warming the room, his coat still carrying the cold air from outside. The restaurant was modest but elegant, with soft music, polished wooden tables, and the quiet confidence of a place that had served thousands of people without ever needing to impress them loudly. The man paused for a moment at the entrance, scanning the room with a habitual sense of superiority that had grown inside him over years of privilege, comfort, and unchallenged assumptions. His name was Thomas, a businessman from London, well-travelled, well-educated, and convinced that the world worked the way he understood it to work. As he was guided to his table, his eyes landed on the waiter approaching him. The waiter was a black man, tall, calm, dressed neatly in a crisp uniform, his movements controlled and professional. His name was Daniel, though Thomas did not bother to ask. In that single moment of eye contact, something unspoken passed between them. Not hostility, not kindness, but judgment. Thomas did not consciously think, "I am better than you," but the thought lived quietly in his posture, in the way he leaned back instead of forward, in the way he barely acknowledged the waiter's presence. Daniel greeted him politely, with a practiced smile that came not from weakness, but from discipline. He had learned long ago that professionalism was his armor. He spoke clearly, respectfully, asking if Thomas would like to see the menu or start with a drink. Thomas answered curtly, barely lifting his eyes, as if Daniel were part of the furniture rather than a human being. He ordered without courtesy, without thanks, and when Daniel repeated the order to confirm it, Thomas corrected him sharply, assuming incompetence where there was none. Daniel nodded, apologized though he had done nothing wrong, and walked away. As the minutes passed, Thomas observed the restaurant around him. He noticed how Daniel moved from table to table, how other guests of different races, ages and backgrounds smiled at him, thanked him, even laughed with him. This unsettled Thomas slightly. It conflicted with an internal image he did not like to admit he had. When Daniel returned with the drink, Thomas inspected it closely as if expecting a mistake. There was none. Still, Thomas found reasons to complain. The water was too cold, then too warm. The napkin wasn't placed properly. The timing between courses was questioned. Each time Daniel responded with patience. Never defensive, never submissive, just steady. Other waiters noticed. A manager observed quietly from a distance, aware that situations like these often revealed more about the guest than the staff. Then something unexpected happened. As Daniel brought the main course, another guest at a nearby table suddenly collapsed. Panic spread through the room. Chairs scraped back. Voices rose. Confusion took over. Before anyone else reacted, Daniel placed the tray down carefully, rushed to the fallen guest and called out calmly for space. He checked the man's breathing, instructed someone to call emergency services, and began first aid with confidence and precision. It became clear that Daniel was trained, perhaps from a past life, perhaps from responsibility learned the hard way. Thomas watched all of this in silence. For the first time, he saw Daniel not as a role, not as a uniform, not as a background figure, but as a man in control of a crisis. The room listened to him. The manager followed his instructions. When the ambulance arrived and the guest was stabilized, the restaurant exhaled collectively. Applause broke out softly, not loud, but sincere. Daniel returned to his duties without seeking attention. When he came back to Thomas's table, something had shifted. Thomas looked up fully this time. He hesitated, then spoke, not with authority but uncertainty. He thanked Daniel, not quickly, not automatically, but deliberately. Daniel nodded, smiled, and said he was just doing his job. But Thomas knew it wasn't just a job. As the meal continued, Thomas found himself thinking about his own life, how often he had judged people without knowing them, how comfort had blinded him to character. He remembered moments from his childhood, comments made casually by adults, ideas absorbed without resistance. He realized that none of his success had required him to question those ideas before, until now. At the end of the meal, Thomas asked Daniel for his name. That simple question carried weight. Daniel told him. They spoke briefly, not deeply, not dramatically, but honestly. Daniel mentioned he had once studied nursing before financial. Realities forced him to work full-time. He spoke without bitterness, only fact. Thomas listened, truly listened, for the first time that evening. When Thomas left, he tipped generously, but more importantly, he left changed. Not transformed into a hero, not suddenly perfect, but aware. Awareness is often the first crack in the wall of prejudice. Daniel cleared the table, as he had done hundreds of times before. To him, the night was not extraordinary. People came with their assumptions, and sometimes they left lighter than they arrived. That was enough. The restaurant returned to its rhythm, but something invisible had happened. There, something that could not be measured in money or manners. A man had been forced to confront himself, not through anger or shame, but through quiet dignity. And sometimes that is how real change begins.